Hello everyone and welcome back to another True Crime Mysteries video. Thank you all for being here. Today we're discussing 3 cases of celebrities serving life sentences and the crimes that put them there. Let's get into it. Number 3. Phil Spector. In the early morning of February 3rd, 2003, a personal driver called 911 saying he thought his boss had shot someone. It took less than 3 minutes for the police to arrive where the driver was waiting. 45 minutes after that, police arrived at the Pyrenees Castle in Alhambra, California, a mansion owned by famed record producer Phil Spector. There, the police found a woman in a chair in the foyer of the house, her legs stretched out in front of her. She'd been shot once in the mouth. The woman would be identified as 40-year-old Lana Clarkson. Lana was a film star who had recently been trying to return to mainstream Hollywood. She had worked in TV and on several movies in her time. Her most notable role was as Barbarian Queen and its sequel. In 2001, Lana had been working to distribute her one-woman show that she'd put so much of her money and effort into. The one-woman show was clips of her acting in different styles and characters, and she'd hoped to escape the typecasting she'd been stuck in for decades. Lana was very interested in her comedic side and wanted to show her actual acting range, that she had more to give than a blonde woman in a bikini. However, she broke both wrists when she fell slipping on a rug while wearing heels, making it hard to follow up with her show, stalling her career at the time almost entirely. By 2003, she had healed and had started working at the House of Blues as a hostess to make ends meet, hoping that working there she would get noticed by someone. And who was Phil Spector? Born on December 26, 1939, he was a record producer who started his career in 1958 as a founding member of the band The Teddy Bears, where he wrote and performed the hit "To Know Him Is to Love Him." However, despite its early success, the band was quickly disbanded. In 1960, Spector co-founded Phil's Records. By 1962, he was the sole owner of the record label at 21 years old, making him at the time the youngest label owner. However, the label was defunct by 1969. Over the years, he worked with numerous singers and groups, with so many songs becoming hits, like "You've Lost That Loving Feeling" by the Righteous Brothers, and he worked with Ike and Tina Turner, as well as the Ronettes. He would go on to marry the lead singer of the Ronettes, Ronnie Bennett, in 1968. Shortly after getting married and having some limited success working with Tina Turner, Spector became more of a recluse. He was always known to be a bit odd and to think very highly of himself. After getting married, Ronnie and Phil Spector adopted Dante Philip Spector in 1969. One Christmas, Phil surprised Ronnie with a Christmas present by adopting twins, Louis Philip Spector and Gary Philip Spector. In a 2003 interview, Dante and Gary Spector reported being sexually and psychologically abused by their father. Quote, "For years we were just caged animals to be let out for Dad's amusement," Dante Spector went on to say. "We were locked in our separate rooms by our governess, let out for breakfast, then taken to school by guards." His adopted children have been very private with their personal life. Ronnie and Spector's marriage was said to have significant strains. He was reported to be very controlling. Spector is said to have made Ronnie drive with a blow-up doll in the passenger seat when she wanted to leave the house. He kept her isolated in their home. She never performed on stage while they were married. With the help of her mother, she was able to flee the house. She was allegedly so scared she left without even putting her shoes on. Once free, she was able to file for divorce, which was finalized in 1974, and she gave up custody of the children and the rights to her songs. In 1970, Phil Spector produced the Beatles' Let It Be album, which would be the last album from the band. He also produced John Lennon's hit Imagine. By the mid-1970s, Phil Spector had produced 18 top 10 singles by various artists. He was credited as the man behind the, quote, "wall of sound." He was regarded as one of the great men in music. In the 1980s, Spector began dating Janice Zanella, and in 1982 they welcomed twins Nicole Spector and Philip Spector Jr. Philip Jr. died of leukemia in 1991. For most of the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, Spector remained inactive in the music industry. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a non-performer in 1989, reported to have been drunk or under the influence while giving a speech, and was taken off stage by his bodyguards. By 2003, he was known to not give interviews and to be very reclusive. He had reconnected with a friend from high school at a 2002 reunion. Her name was Rae Davis. They had started having dinners together often, and on February 2nd they had dinner at the Grill. On this night, Phil was drinking, which he'd not done in the 5 months that they'd been getting together. This was concerning, as Spector took medication that did not mix well with alcohol. Rae Davis said, quote, "He was not his usual self. He was not interested in what I had to say. In all the time I went out with him, he was a great fun to be with. This weekend, the behavior was totally different." He would take Rae home and ask the waitress from the Grill to join him for a drink at Trader Vic's. There he would continue to drink. They moved on to Don Tana's and finally the House of Blues, where he would meet Lana Clarkson after the waitress he'd been with previously had gone home. Outside the House of Blues, he would convince Lana Clarkson to come back to his home. When she got into his car, that was when the driver drove them to his mansion. A short time later, at around 5 a.m., the driver heard a noise. He got out to investigate, going to the door of the home, finding Spector holding a gun. It was then that he noticed the woman behind Spector. This was when the driver got in the car, drove down the street, and called 911. Spector was arrested on the morning of February 3rd. He reported that the police had been very forceful with him, and Spector would later say the woman had actually taken her own life in an accident. Police would look into every possibility, but with how the body had been laid and where the gun was found, they believed only Spector could have been the cause of Lana Clarkson's death. Spector was arrested and charged with the murder in second degree. After Spector's arrest, stories started surfacing of his relationships with women. These discoveries would show Spector to be violent and use guns to threaten women. One woman, Deborah Robitaille, reported that Spector on more than one occasion had threatened her with a gun to her head, trying to stop her from leaving his house. At least 4 women came forward willingly to testify at his trial that he had threatened them with a gun. It looked like Phil Spector had no respect for women and hated them. Spector would go to trial for the murder of Lana Clarkson in 2007. While he'd been awaiting trial since 2003, he'd been out on a $1 million bond. While he was awaiting trial, he married Raquel Short in 2006, and she would be seen with Spector at every court hearing. The trial was televised, and Spector treated it like a show. He would show up to court with crazy hair, and the biggest headlines at the time would be about Spector wearing wigs to court. After a while, he started having a more normal hairstyle at court, and it would be confirmed later that they were all wigs. His defense would argue that Lana had committed suicide. Phil had been wearing white, and he had no blood spatter on his clothes. However, the prosecution would show evidence that Spector had committed the murder and attempted to clean himself up before the police arrived. The blood spatter would not have reached him if he had had the gun in Lana's mouth and was above her. There was some controversy about a fingernail that might have been removed from the scene. It was never found and never entered into evidence. Lana had one chipped fingernail that the prosecution believed had chipped when the gun had fired while Lana attempted to remove the gun from her mouth but was too weak from her wrist injury. The jury would come back hung, 10 in favor of convicting and 2 in favor of acquitting, and the judge would ultimately call a mistrial. Spector could be seen celebrating with his wife after the mistrial. Spector had a second trial in 2008. This time, it was not televised. The jury would start deliberations on March 26, 2009, and on April 13th, the jury convicted Phil Spector of second-degree murder, and he was taken immediately into custody. On May 29, 2009, he was sentenced to 19 years to life in prison. Appeals were made in 2011, 2012, and 2016, but they were all unsuccessful. In December 2020, Phil Spector contracted COVID-19, and on January 16th, at the age of 81, Phil Spector died in a hospital. He would have been eligible for parole in 2024. Number 2. Aaron Hernandez. It was around 5 p.m. on June 17, 2013, when a young man was jogging in an industrial park in North Attleboro, Massachusetts, when suddenly something caught his attention. He investigated further and discovered the body of a young man. The man would later be identified as 27-year-old Odin Lloyd. An autopsy would show that the victim had been fatally shot 6 times. The next day, on June 18th, authorities were able to tie Odin Lloyd to local football legend 23-year-old Aaron Hernandez. Hernandez was an NFL professional football player who was a 4th-round pick by the New England Patriots in 2010 and played the tight end position. Hernandez was engaged to Cheyenne Jenkins, and they'd been together since 2007. They welcomed a daughter in 2012 and had lived together since 2011. Cheyenne Jenkins was how Aaron knew Odin Lloyd. They met at Jenkins' family gathering because Odin Lloyd was dating Cheyenne's sister, Shania Jenkins. The two were reported to have become fast friends. Police would later find surveillance footage of Odin Lloyd getting into a car with Hernandez on the morning of June 17th with 2 other men later identified as Carlos Ortiz and Ernest Wallace. Phone records would show that Hernandez had contacted Wallace the day before the shooting, asking him to come to his house. Police looked into the rental car that had been seen on security camera footage, and they found the vehicle belonged to a local enterprise rental company. They located the vehicle and tested it for prints, and checked for additional evidence. After this, Aaron Hernandez was served with a search warrant for his home, and when asked to relinquish his cell phone, he gave them a broken phone. Police also questioned why Hernandez had his house cleaners come on June 17th, the day Odin's body was discovered, and not the normal cleaning day. DNA found at the scene connected Hernandez to the crime scene. A wad of bubble gum was found on one of the shell casings found at the scene. The prosecution was gathering a substantial amount of evidence, all of which pointed to Aaron Hernandez. Hernandez was arrested on June 26, 2013, and charged with first-degree murder. The New England Patriots released him that day from his contract. The New England Patriots would also do an unheard-of jersey exchange in July 2013, offering people the opportunity to exchange their Hernandez jerseys for something else, and hundreds showed up to do so. Police believe that Aaron Hernandez and his friends picked Odin Lloyd up early on June 17th to hang out as they often did. However, Hernandez had other plans. They drove him out to the industrial park, had Lloyd get out of the vehicle before they shot him 6 times, then spat his gum on the ground before driving back to his house, leaving Lloyd there, and a lot of what happened that day is still unknown, as witnesses and Hernandez have not talked about the actual events. The case would move quickly after the arrest of Ortiz and Wallace on June 27, 2013. Initially, they were charged as accessories to murder, however, later they were charged with first-degree murder as well. Wallace would go to trial and be acquitted for murder, but convicted of being an accessory after the fact. He was sentenced to 4.5 years to 7 years in prison. Ortiz would change his plea to guilty and be convicted of accessory after the fact. He was also sentenced to 4.5 to 7 years. Next would be Tanya Singleton, a cousin of Hernandez. They connected her to the crimes via a car that may have been involved in another incident from 2012. Singleton also refused to testify against Hernandez. She was fighting cancer then. She would be indicted on charges of criminal contempt and conspiracy to commit accessory after the fact. She would plead guilty to criminal conduct and be put on probation, having to wear an ankle monitor. It had been reported that she died of cancer in 2015. Hernandez would plead not guilty. His trial would start on January 9, 2015. While awaiting trial, evidence would come up of Hernandez's involvement in a double homicide in Boston. Hernandez would be indicted on the double homicide from Boston in 2014 and would also plead not guilty. In the Odin Lloyd case, he would be found guilty of first-degree murder on April 15, 2015.
Person. On indictment 2013-983-A, charging the defendant Aaron Hernandez with murder. What say you, Madam Foreperson? Is the defendant not guilty, guilty of murder in the first degree, or guilty of murder in the second degree?
Guilty of murder in the first degree.
Madam Foreperson, by which theory or theories, deliberate premeditation and or extreme atrocity or cruelty?
Extreme atrocity or cruelty.
Indictment 2013-983-B, charging the defendant Aaron Hernandez with unlawful possession of a firearm while not at home or work. What say you, Madam Foreperson? Is the defendant not?
In Massachusetts, the only sentence for first-degree murder is life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was incarcerated in the Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center. However, this was not the end of Aaron Hernandez's legal problems. He would be indicted in a shooting from 2013 of a man named Alexander Bradley, who was a friend of Hernandez. It is believed that he shot him because he was involved with Hernandez in the 2012 double homicide in Boston. Alexander Bradley had been shot in the face, losing an eye, but survived the attack. On April 14, 2017, Hernandez was found not guilty of the double murder. But 5 days later, Aaron Hernandez was found dead hanging in his cell. He used a bedsheet to commit suicide. At the time, prison officials did not consider him a suicide risk, and he had not been put on round-the-clock watch. After his death, they did an autopsy, and they would find that Hernandez had a severe case of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, also known as CTE, which is a brain condition thought to be linked to repeated head injuries and blows to the head. It slowly gets worse over time and leads to dementia, but the right help with treatment and support can manage the symptoms. It is believed that this may have attributed to his declining mental health and his suicide. After his death, his lawyers filed a motion to vacate his conviction, citing abatement ab initio. Under Massachusetts law, this principle asserts that when a criminal defendant dies but has not exhausted all legal appeals, the case reverts to its status at the beginning. The conviction is vacated. The defendant is rendered innocent. Hernandez had been in the process of appealing the Odin-Lloyd conviction. The motion was initially granted in May 2017, however the conviction was later reinstated in 2019 by the Supreme Court, stating that ab initio is outdated. After his death, reports would come out that Hernandez had been secretly gay and had come out to his mother and girlfriend while in jail. An old high school classmate would confirm that they had a relationship during high school. Hernandez was deeply ashamed of his attraction to men. He had been sexually abused as a child by a babysitter for years, and while on prison calls, he often went on homophobic rants. His self-hatred got worse with the decline of his mental health. After his incarceration, he also became deeply religious. It was an aspect of his life that he struggled with, the childhood trauma, his sexuality, and his religious beliefs. There had been some speculation on whether Odin-Lloyd had found out either about the double homicide or Hernandez hiding his sexuality, and that may have been the motive for the murder. However, it is also revealed that Hernandez abused illicit substances, especially during the off-season, and was prone to bouts of paranoia, mood swings, and violent agitation. We will likely never know what happened that prompted the murder of Odin-Lloyd. Number 1. Rae Carruth. On November 16, 1999, just after midnight in Charlotte, North Carolina, a woman called Sharika Adams called 911 and reported being shot at. During the 911 call, Sharika told the dispatcher that she had been shot and that she was 8 months pregnant. While talking to dispatchers, she also revealed that the father of her child was in the car in front of her and had slowed down. Then another car came up beside her and shot inside the vehicle. Evidence would later show that she'd been shot 4 times in a close-range shot pattern through the driver's window. Sharika would name the father of her unborn child as Rae Carruth. Rae Carruth is a former NFL wide receiver. He was a first-round draft pick in the 1997 draft, and the Carolina Panthers picked him up. In his rookie year wearing the number 89, he did well and earned a place on the NFL's all-rookie team in 1997. However, he broke his foot in the opening game in 98 and was out for the rest of the season. He was still actively playing for the Panthers in 99. Shericka Adams was 24, a realtor, and had worked as an exotic dancer until she got pregnant. The club was where she met Rae Carruth, and they had started a sexual relationship. They had not been on a date before she had gotten pregnant. This was one of the first dates they'd ever been on. Shericka had always wanted to be a mother, and this was her first child. During the 911 call, Shericka said that Rae Carruth had driven away after the shooting, leaving her alone. It took almost 10 minutes for the dispatchers and medic to find Shericka. After being rushed to the hospital, Shericka went into a coma. The medical staff performed an emergency C-section. The child had been born without oxygen for 70 minutes. The child, a boy, survived, but he was born with cerebral palsy due to complications surrounding his birth. Authorities would quickly tie Rae Carruth to the shooting. Through the investigation into Carruth, they would also get the names of some of the accomplices, 44-year-old Van Brett Watkins and 24-year-old Michael Kennedy. Carruth and Watkins would be arrested Thursday, November 25, 1999, and charged with conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, attempted murder, and shooting into an occupied vehicle. Kennedy would be arrested the next day and charged the same. All three men would be held on bail of $1.5 million, but the judge would return at the end of the day and change Carruth's bail to $3 million, $1 million for each charge. A fourth man would be charged, Stanley Abraham, who was 19 years old. Carruth posted bail and was released on December 7th. On December 14th, 1999, after almost a month in a coma and having never met her son, Shericka Adams passed away. All men were charged with first-degree murder, which would make all these men eligible for the death penalty. Carruth failed to appear for the resentencing hearing, and the FBI became involved as Carruth was now on the run. They would find him a few days later after a tip came in that he'd been seen in a motel in Wildersville, Tennessee. It was reported that Carruth was there with a woman. When agents searched the motel room, they didn't find Carruth. Agents searched the cars and vehicles in the parking lot and found Carruth in the trunk of a Toyota registered to the woman he was reported to have been with. The FBI agents would report that Carruth was very cooperative with authorities once discovered. After his capture, Carruth had been held without bail awaiting trial. On December 16th, the Carolina Panthers released Carruth, citing moral clauses in his contract. The next day, the NFL suspended him indefinitely. Carruth was the first active NFL player to be charged with murder, as O.J. Simpson was not active at the time of his charges. Opening statements of the trial started in November 2000. The official charges were murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit murder, shooting into an occupied vehicle, and using an instrument to destroy an unborn child. Both Michael Kennedy and Van Brett Watkins would testify during the trial. Carruth had been friends with Kennedy for a while, and they were known to hang out frequently, both at his apartment and the house that he got after signing with the Panthers.
Did you say, "I hope the bitch dies"? Did you say that?
That's the bitch I was talking about.
Oh, I see.
Rae Carruth. That's your client. The bitch.
Nobody wanted to be within arm's length of Van Brett Watkins.
I was very glad the marshals were between me and him.
He had a look in his eyes that I've maybe only seen once or twice in my life. It was the look of, I can do whatever I want to do to whoever I want to do it to.
If you pushed enough of Van Brett Watkins' buttons, you could see what a violent anger management problem he had.
So you're sort of a hitman without a weapon. Is that what you are?
If that's what you want to say.
Well, that's what you were, according to you.
If that's what I could kill you with my hands. Okay.
Is that what you were?
I could kill you with my hands.
And the court was convinced by Carruth's attorney to find him to be a hostile witness to them, even though they were calling him, and allowed them to cross-examine him. They, I'll use the term, pushed him to the point where he, at one point, actually threatened Carruth's attorney.
And so did he say, well, you go on back and you go get that gun, because I don't need to be spending another $200 and having Mr. Kennedy running all around all night looking for a gun when
I didn't need a gun. Okay, for me to kill somebody, I don't need a gun. Can't you look and see? I'm 286 pounds. Okay, I would rip you like a rag doll.
I'm 286 pounds, and I could rip you limb from limb like a little rag doll.
I'll tear you up like a rag doll.
I'll shake you like a rag doll.
I could rip you apart like a rag doll.
Right after that, I said, I have no further questions.
I'm done, Your Honor. Anything further?
You're right about that.
I mean, you go back in that jury room and you look at each other and you think, oh my God, did that just happen?
That influenced me. This guy was dangerous, without a soul.
Watkins met Carruth while working at the club. He would eventually hire Watkins as personal security. Stanley Abraham was friends with Kennedy and had been with him the night that Sharika was shot. It is believed that after discovering that Sharika was pregnant, Rae had asked her to abort the baby, as he was already paying $5,000 a month in child support to his high school sweetheart who had gotten pregnant years before. Sharika refused because she had an abortion and didn't want to have another. He is then alleged to have asked Watkins to beat her up so that it would abort the baby. He refused because he was a hitman, but he didn't beat up women. They apparently went back and forth for months negotiating until Carruth would agree to pay $3,000 upfront and $3,000 after to have Sharika killed, who now was almost 8 months pregnant. Initially, he had asked Watkins to kill her while he was away at training camp so that he would have a solid alibi, but that didn't happen, and it was decided that it would have to be done while Carruth took Sharika out on a date. On November 15th, Carruth would call his friend Kennedy and ask if he could borrow a plain vehicle, something without flash. Kennedy was driving a rental at the time and agreed to trade cars. When Kennedy got to the house, Rae asked if he could get a gun, and he said he knew a friend selling a gun. Abraham was with Kennedy at the time. Kennedy would end up taking Watkins and Abraham to buy a gun. Carruth would take Sharika to a movie on their date, and they drove in separate vehicles towards Carruth's house on the way back from the movie. Carruth would call the car with Kennedy, Watkins, and Abraham. When it was time, Carruth slowed down his vehicle, making Sharika slow down. Kennedy was driving the car with Watkins in the passenger seat. Pulling up to Sharika's car, Watkins would fire 4 shots into the driver's window. Carruth then drove away, leaving the scene. Watkins said that he got out to check if she was dead, then returned to the car. Kennedy then drove away, and after that, Sharika called 911. For testifying, Van Brett Watkins took a plea deal of second-degree murder to take the death penalty off the table and was sentenced to a minimum of 40 years. He will not be eligible for parole until he's 85 years old. Michael Kennedy didn't have the same plea deal when he testified, but would eventually plead guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 11 years and 8 months in prison. He was released in 2011. Abraham would plead to a lesser accessory charge, as it was believed he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had no arrest record and was only 19, and spent 90 days in jail in a youth facility before being released on parole. Rae Carruth was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, shooting into an occupied vehicle, and using an instrument to destroy an unborn child. The jury found him not guilty of first-degree murder, stating that he was not the one who pulled the trigger, and this saved him from the chance of the death penalty. Members of the jury had gone on to say that if that had been an option, they would have gone for it. He was sentenced to 18 years and 11 months. Carruth was released from prison in 2018 and moved to Pennsylvania. His son, now 22 years old, has lived with Sandra Adams, his grandmother, who has now been an advocate against domestic violence since her daughter's death. He recently graduated high school in 2021, a great accomplishment for him. While in prison, Carruth sent a letter to Sandra Adams asking for forgiveness.
I just wanted him to see his father face to face.
New at 6, what Carruth told me he hopes for one day for the son who survived.
I wanted him to know that I do want to be there, that I do love him.
Carruth is set to be released in 4 days, and I got a phone call from him to talk about What's next? I'm Erica Bryant.
And I'm Paul Boyd. The former NFL star has spent more than 18 years in prison for a plot to murder his then pregnant girlfriend, Sharika Adams, and their unborn son.
Adams died a month after that shooting, but her son, Chancellor Lee, lived. Carruth spoke to me about Chancellor, what he wants to say to him, and what he hopes for his life.
Chancellor Lee Adams will be 19 years old next month. Born with cerebral palsy because of the shooting that killed his mother, he struggles every day, but still is almost always smiling. His father hasn't seen Chancellor since he was very young, but Rae Carruth told me in a phone interview from prison that he wants that to change.
Whatever it took for me to be a part of Chancellor's life to make things right with him, I was and still am willing to do. He will never have his mother in his life. Right or wrong, he still has the opportunity to have me in his life.
Chancellor has been raised by Sandra Adams, his maternal grandmother. In the past, she's told me that she is open with her grandson, but has never gone into detail with him about Carruth's crime.
I tell Chancellor that his father did a terrible thing, and he's away now.
Now, Carruth says he hopes they can come together.
I've apologized to Miss Adams for the loss of her daughter and taking responsibility for what happened. I don't want to harm Miss Adams. I guess, honestly, I just want to truly be forgiven. I'd love to have the opportunity to make things right with her and Chancellor.
You said that you wanted to contribute to Chancellor Lee's life. Does that also mean financially?
Absolutely. Whatever I can do for my son, I will. I don't feel like the burden should be Miss Adams alone, or even the kind individuals who have aided her and assisted her in helping care for my son. That's still my responsibility. For as long as I'm alive, it's my responsibility to help take care of my son, whether I'm allowed to have a relationship or not.
In an interview before his release, he said he would like to be involved in helping his son financially and to see him if he wanted. There has been no confirmed meeting. Sandra Adams has reported to have forgiven Carruth and even said she was grateful to him for her grandson, saying in a statement, quote, "I'm not going to have anything negative to say about him. I thank him for my grandson. Like I say, you can focus on what you've lost or what you have left. So I didn't lose. I have my grandson. I have my daughter with me in my heart always." Well, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end. As always, if you want to support the channel, the easiest way is to hit the like button. You can also subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss my next upload. Other ways to support the channel by joining my Patreon or channel membership. I also have merch available, and you find all the links in the description box, plus a few extras. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and now Twitch. But with that being said, thank you so much for being here and supporting what I do. It is very much appreciated. However, that's it from me. I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.